you're sitting at 112 in your draft. Everybody wants these new shiny toys.
Hello and welcome to Fantasy Football Freaks. I'm Jason, he's Vaz, and we have an outstanding show for you today. We don't want to waste any time. Vaz, you ready to go for this one?
For sure, let's do it. Can't wait.
Okay, because we have a very important topic to discuss today, because a lot of people play fantasy football, and eventually, once you've played, redraft leagues enough, eventually, you kind of want to try dynasty leagues. But the problem is, a lot of people that have only played in redraft leagues all their life, you make a lot of mistakes when you join a dynasty league, and the dynasty veterans take advantage of you. It's like, going to a poker game after never really playing before, and the sharks just eat you alive. And of course, the issue with dynasty leagues is once you get off to a bad start in your dynasty league, it can really set you back for years on end. Eventually, that player might quit, and now you got to find a new player. It becomes an absolute mess. So what we have done is we have prepared the 10 commandments of dynasty leagues. And this is going to set you up to understand the nuances between redraft and dynasty leagues. And I think even dynasty veterans are going to be able to learn some valuable lessons from today's show. So without any further ado, let's get into the 10 commandments, starting with number 10.
Thou shalt not overvalue running backs.
This, when you hear this, typically when you play in redraft leagues, running backs are everything, right? Because the gap, the difference between a top running back and the middle tier is gigantic. So running backs are very important, and they're important in dynasty as well. But the issue is the lifespan of a dynasty running back is much shorter than that of a wide receiver, a tight end, and a quarterback. So because if you're not competing, because we'll get to this as well, but some teams, they're not actually competing full out, which means they don't need to value those running backs. Therefore, the value of those running backs are only for the top tier teams. So supply and demand becomes an issue. And because of that, the value of running backs are basically lower in dynasty leagues than they are in redraft. There are other times that you can get a lot for them, which is situational.
Right. So yeah, let's not get this twisted here. If you want to win in dynasty, you need running backs. Okay, running backs win championships. But I think what we're saying is that their value is much lower than it is in redraft. So there are some ways that you can acquire running backs cheaper in order to keep the value of your dynasty team high. And
Exactly.
I think I could share some input there as well. So if you have a contender, you need running backs, okay? If you have a contender, you need running backs, but you don't want to be putting all your dynasty value into your running back position. So what I would suggest is at the beginning of a season, okay, this is a strategy that has really worked for me. If you can acquire an entire team's running back room, then you've established a safety net per se, right? If you had last year's Josh Jacobs, then you look to acquire Zamir White. That way, if Josh Jacobs gets hurt, you have a safety net in Zamir White that you got on the cheap, right? So acquiring these handcuffs or backup running backs can be very valuable, especially if you have the starter in place already on your dynasty team. Another strategy I use is I do not try to acquire running backs when their value is expensive, like at the beginning of a season, okay? I look to acquire running backs at the deadline, and I look to acquire cheap running backs that can be league winners. For example, like a few years ago, Rashad Penny transformed into a league winner, and he was very cheap to get because he had been a backup most of the season, and he had been dealing with injuries. And suddenly he was putting up 25 points per game. So if you can acquire these cheap running backs at the deadline, you don't lose a lot of value on your dynasty team.
Yeah. And always remember, if you're not, a top 4 or 5 team competing for a championship, sell your running backs, turn them into draft picks, turn them into wide receivers so that they retain their value longer. Whereas, I mean, if you're going for it, if you are one of the top teams, then yeah, you're going to have to spend, or you want to ensure that you do have a good running back unit. But we'll talk a little bit more about how to strengthen that later on. Let's take a look at Commandment number 9.
Thou shalt be the first to contact a new owner.
This happens every now and then, maybe not every season, and every league is different. Some leagues, you get a lot of turnover. You have a new owner or two every season. Other leagues, I mean, if you're a tight-knit bunch, then you're just going to have the same 10, 12, or 14 players playing for 5, 10 years, and this is going to be irrelevant. But if there is an owner that, decides to leave the league and you find a new owner for that orphan team, always be the first person to contact that new owner, because that person did not draft that team. That person did not acquire those players. They inherited them. And there's going to be some people on that team that he doesn't really value as high as maybe he should. And he's going to just want to, get his guys, his preferences, which means that sometimes you're able to acquire those guys for much lower than they should be. I've seen it happen time and time again. I just joined a new fantasy baseball league. That's a dynasty format. And the first thing I did was I cleared out some of the guys that I didn't really care for, and I acquired guys that I knew that I liked. I might not have gotten the proper value, but so be it. It's just everyone has their own style. Vaz, I'm sure you've seen this all the time too, and I know you always contact the new guys first.
Well, yeah. Well, everybody, when they join a new league, they want to put their mark on their team, right? So yeah, like you said, they want to ship out some guys. And the one suggestion I would have is don't try to hit the home run, because if a new owner joins your league, they are going to have experience in Dynasty. They're joining as an orphan. It means they know what they're doing, I would say. So they want to put their mark on their team, but you're not going to be able to take advantage of them. So don't be afraid to hit a single. Like Tony Gwynn is the best hitter I've ever seen. That guy never hit home runs. He just dinked and dunked all day long. So I would suggest, if there's a new owner, right away, yeah, message them, find out how they like their team, what pieces they want to move. But don't assume that they're going to hold on to these studs because you like them, right? Definitely inquire about everybody, see how they feel, and don't try to hit that home run. Be okay with hitting a single here and there.
All right, let's take a look at the 8th commandment.
Thou shalt be active all year round.
Vaz, I think you are probably the master of this one.
Well, okay. Here's the thing. A fair amount of dynasty owners take a break from, let's say, the Super Bowl until the NFL draft, okay? But this is a huge mistake because often enough, this is the time where certain dynasty owners want to reshape their teams. Some guys will decide at this point, okay, it's time for me to go rebuild. And suddenly there's an entire team worth of players on the market, okay? And then you need to be acquiring these players on the cheap, right? If you've acquired draft picks over the course of a 2 or 3 period time, right? And you don't want to use all those picks at the upcoming draft. Now is the time to trade those picks when they are at the highest value. And you can acquire some vets for your championship run when they are cheapest, when one team decides it's time to sell. So yeah, you want to be active all year round, always messaging people about trades, always staying up to date on values, which we will get to in a little bit, right?
Yeah, I think this is a little bit similar from the previous one when I mentioned that a new owner comes in and they've got their own agenda. What happens in the off season is a lot of owners have their agendas change. So teams that have been rebuilding, maybe they want to suddenly go for it this year. Or maybe the team that just won their championship but has an aging roster wants to begin a rebuild. So whenever there's like a transition of that sort, once again, you want to be the first person that's in conversations with that owner, because there might be deals to be had for people that want to change directions. There's a price to pay when you change directions, and you want to be the one that's taking advantage of those prices. And that usually happens in the off season. So once the Super Bowl's over, don't just, disappear from your league. Take a look at who might be transitioning in a different direction. Just have, conversations. Hey, are you thinking about going for it next year? Or are you thinking about rebuilding now that you've won a championship? Could be something as simple as that. Keep that in the back of your mind, and then see if you can drum up a mutually beneficial trade offer that can help you just a little bit more.
Yeah. Last year I saw a trade at this time, Saquon Barkley for a future first. Everybody in my league saw that as a huge heist for the person who acquired Saquon Barkley. But that first turned into the 101 in the next year, because that owner decided at that point to completely shift gears and went total rebuild. And now he's looking at getting Caleb Williams with 101, and of course Caleb Williams is worth a ton more than Saquon Barkley. So yeah. But I'm sure that at that time, the owner who acquired Saquon Barkley, he went to the championship. So he also found a piece that could help him in his championship drive.
Yeah. Let's take a look at the 7th commandment.
Thou shalt know the tendencies of other owners.
Know which owners are willing to trade high picks or good young prospects in order to, acquire their final pieces to win a championships, because not everyone is willing to do so. Vaz, you and I have played with enough different people where, there are different types of people at the poker table. There are different types of people in your fantasy league.
Right. Some people never want to rebuild. They want to compete every single year, okay? And these are the guys that you can target for future draft picks, right? The thing is about draft picks, everybody values them differently, right? Just because you think they are so valuable and you really value draft picks 1 or 2 years out, doesn't mean your league mate does. So let's say, for instance, you're sitting at 112 in your draft. Everybody wants these new shiny toys. You can look to trade that 112 for a pick 2 years down the road, a first round pick 2 years down the road, to an owner who never wants to rebuild and is always stuck in the middle. And maybe 2 years later, you'll have the 103 instead of the 112.
Yeah. I've mentioned this to you before, Vaz, but I've got a guy that I play with in one of my Dynasty leagues, and he hasn't told me this directly. Let's see if he notices this when he watches. But I've heard from other members of our league that he has notes on each player in the league, and he has notes on what trades they made, how he felt that, they went about that trade, and how he can use that information to trade with that player in the future. And kind of mixing that with what you just said, Vaz, here's a suggestion. Go back and look at all the players in your league that have drafted in the rookie draft. Now imagine this. Let's say that someone just seems to always draft poorly. Every player that they seem to draft seems to become a bust. How about something like saying, you don't seem to draft very well. You should just trade your picks. I mean, get value for it now rather than getting nothing for it later. There's things like that. When you notice somebody's strengths in one area and somebody's weakness in another, use that against them. You're going to play poker against each player differently. You should be playing fantasy football against each owner differently.
I think it's genius to what your league mate does, to write notes about each person. I know not everybody has the discipline to do that, but I think noticing tendencies is super important. Let me give an example. In one of my leagues, my league mate in a single QB league just traded a mid first round pick for Bryce Young. Okay. I don't even think Bryce Young is a mid first round pick value in a super flex league. So when I saw that right away, I made a mental note of this. Okay. This owner overvalues quarterbacks. So I'm going to target him if I've got a quarterback to sell, right? So just picking up on these little tendencies here and there can make a huge difference in your league.
Absolutely. Let's take a look at commandment number 6.
Thou shalt not be passive with trades.
I think this is it's obvious for anyone who plays Dynasty football, but for someone coming from redraft to Dynasty, you have to understand that there is more trading in Dynasty because there can be more mutually beneficial trades. When it comes to redraft, it's kind of like, oh, I'll trade you a quarterback for a running back. I'll trade you a wide receiver for a tight end, like that type of trade, because everyone's trying to win that year. But in Dynasty, some people are rebuilding. So draft picks are more important than a veteran quarterback like Aaron Rodgers. So it promotes trading, which means that there are going to be more trades and you need to be involved in that.
You know what? Trading is what makes Dynasty great, in my opinion. And so many trades can happen because there are draft picks available. So any trade can be made more even by throwing in draft picks, right? So for that reason, you can always be trading and acquiring pieces in Dynasty leagues. Everybody has those owners in their leagues who just do nothing. They never trade. They're afraid of being taken advantage of, it seems, right? But like I said before, not every trade needs to be a home run. You can't be afraid of losing trades, okay? You need to hit those singles from here and there, dink and dunk. So don't be afraid to make trades. Always be aware of player values and how you can accumulate value through making trades.
And also be creative with your trades because there can be opportunities that arise for you to take advantage of trades. Let's take a look at injuries as an example. When an injury happens, do you have something to alleviate, that team's stress? If a quarterback goes down, do you have a quarterback, an older quarterback that you don't need that you can offer to get some draft capital or younger players or things like that? There can be situations like another one that I always try to do every rookie draft. If I finished, at the top and I've got like the last pick of the first round or, a late pick in the first round, or maybe even like an early pick in the second round, I'll always try to offer that for a first round pick the next year because that becomes a lottery ticket. And I have had a situation where, the team that came third place that year took after winning the championship, I had the 112. And the third place team took my 112, picked Darrell Henderson, who didn't do anything. And then he finished last that season. So I ended up trading the 112 for what turned out to be the 1-1 the next season, which I think was Joe Burrow. So, imagine the type of value you can get because you're never going to lose value on that trade. You're only going to gain, and it becomes a lottery ticket of how much you're going to win. So be creative. There's other different interesting ways that you can, pull trades and create trades into your favor.
It's great that you mentioned that exact point. Okay. So if I'm in a draft and I'm looking to move back, I'm always thinking about acquiring future draft picks. Because that is, some people value draft picks out, like a few years out, as less than current. Okay. But I'm not one of those people. So if I'm trading back, I'm always looking to acquire future draft picks rather than draft picks in the current draft. They will increase in value. Now, at the same time, if I'm looking to move up, I'm trying not to trade away my future draft picks. I'm trying to trade away draft picks in the current draft when they're at peak value.
When they have perceived greater value.
Correct. So I would suggest the same for others. If you're looking to trade up, be creative with your current draft picks and try not to mortgage your future. Whereas if you're trading back, try to accumulate value in future draft capital.
Okay, and that is going to lead right into our next commandment. The 5th commandment says,
Thou shalt always acquire picks.
And like you said, Vaz, I know this is near and dear to your heart, but there's always ways to just, throw in an extra third. Like some people, I'll be the first to say, I don't value 4th round and 5th round picks. And I know, like, I'll give those out pretty easily. And I'm sure some people know that about me. Whereas you're the kind of guy that it doesn't matter how low it is. If it's a pick, I'll take it. I know you always acquire any pick.
Especially in our league format that drafts before the NFL draft, because you can hit those home runs a little bit easier than in other leagues. But yeah, the thing is about draft picks is they always have a value, right? The guys at the bottom end of your roster have no value. They can be dropped at any point to add a free agent. If you have a 4th or 5th round pick, even if they are the same value as those end of the roster guys, they don't need to be dropped, right? So they will always maintain value, and they can turn into something good. Like, for example, you could hit an Isaiah Pacheco in round 5, or it's just a lottery ticket, right? Maybe it's only a 5% chance, but still, it's a lottery ticket that I do want to accumulate. And then, like you said, about always acquiring draft picks, even if you are a contender, there are pieces on your team you can move off to acquire draft picks. Let's say you have an abundance of receivers, okay? And just Cortland Sutton is sitting on your bench, okay? He's never getting into your starting lineup. He's your wide receiver 5 or wide receiver 6. You need to look to move a piece like that. He's just aging and losing value on your bench. Look to take him and add a late second if possible, and when he's at peak value or something like that. Like, always look to trade away something on your team to acquire future draft capital so that you can get younger and prolong your dynasty.
Yeah, I know we've had a debate over this before, but also see how much you value your picks compared to the round before. As an example, I've said I would rather have a 1st round pick over 3 second round picks. I think anybody would rather have a 1st round pick over 2 seconds, right? So, this is all things being equal. Obviously, if it's a late first compared to 2 early seconds, you want the 2 early seconds. But all things being equal, that's how I value it. I would put it at 3-1. I know, most people will take the 1 first over the 2 seconds, but some people, especially beginners, you can catch them on things like that. It's like, I'll give you, especially if you're doing, I'll give you my 2 second picks that are mid this year during this draft that we're doing right now for your 1st round pick next year. And, they perceive that 1st round pick next year. Well, if I'm going to be competing, then maybe that'll be a late 1st round pick next year. And maybe, like pick 12 isn't worth as much as, let's say, 2-4 and 2-6. I don't know. But at the same time, maybe that doesn't become, 112. Maybe that becomes 1-6 or a lottery ticket. You never know. But taking that chance on, moving up by offering multiple picks of the later round to move up in a earlier round, even if it's in a later year, be creative on how you acquire those picks.
Mm-hmm. I will mention one thing. Often enough, when you see a trade happen that's 2 for 1, so like 2 lesser players for 1 better player, often enough, I want to be on the one side. I want to be acquiring the foundational piece for my team, right? Same thing with draft picks. If you're getting a 1st round pick for 2 seconds or 2 seconds and a third, something like this, you're more likely to hit that foundational piece on your 1st round pick, even if it's down the road. It's okay. That pick will increase in value. And everybody fancies themselves the 112, the 111, but it doesn't always turn out that way. Injuries strike, and those picks that seem like they could be late, they could shoot up and be worth a ton. So yeah, I totally agree with what you said. Acquire those future firsts whenever you can. If you're sitting there at the 201 and you've just dropped a tier in your rankings, yeah, send out a message to everyone or send out an offer to everyone. You're 201 for everybody's future first and see if one hits.
Let's take a look at our 4th commandment.
Thou shalt stay ahead of others as asset values change.
This is important both in season and out of season. And when we're talking about assets, we're talking about both trade values because pick values, because pick values are always moving up, right? Generally speaking. And player values are usually going down, although, sometimes you see breakouts happen. But I think we're talking about the more obvious ones like aging players. And right now as well, during free agency, a player's value can skyrocket or go down in the dumps based on what happens in free agency, offseason trades, things like that. So always keep up with what's going on, because it might, either shoot up someone's value or shoot down someone's value that you're not aware of.
Okay, so I think an important thing to note here is a lot of people use trade calculators as a resource. And I think trade calculators are very useful as a resource. But when I'm thinking about player values, I try not to use trade calculators. Even on Keep Trade Cut, which is probably the best site to use because it's crowdsourced with Dynasty players, what I try to do is I try to understand where players would go in a Dynasty startup draft, because that pinpoints their exact value. For example, if I see that like TJ Hawkinson is the tight end 6 in on Keep Trade Cut, but I know that if I did a Dynasty startup recently and he was the third tight end off the board, then I know that real Dynasty drafters value him more than he's valued on Keep Trade Cut, perhaps because of injury or whatnot. So try to understand where players are being taken in startup drafts to understand their exact value in relation to other players. That being said, trade calculators are very useful when you are proposing trades. So if you are especially like if you know that certain owners use trade calculators, then put your pieces into a trade calculator to try to even it out or to try to make it a win for them, even though you know that you're getting the value on your side.
Absolutely. And that goes back into our tendencies things as well, because certain players or owners, that they look at certain sites and, they'll treat those rankings as, the Bible. So if that's the case, they can be taken advantage of in certain ways like that as well. Let's take a look at our third commandment.
Thou shalt know all relevant rookies each draft year.
And I'll be the first to admit that when I went into my first Dynasty startup, I did not know enough rookies. I knew maybe 5, at the most 10 of the top rookies. And clearly in hindsight, I needed to know maybe like 20 or 30, because I clearly was handicapped compared to some of the more experienced Dynasty League players at the time, because I ended up with maybe one rookie on my team, maybe not even, because I'm sure everyone were taking rookies earlier. And I remember thinking like, wow, these rookies are going really early. And I ended up with none. My team aged out quick, and I was kind of screwed pretty quickly in that particular league.
Well, yeah, in redraft leagues, rookies are a bit scary because they sometimes take a while to hit. But in Dynasty, they can maintain value longer, even if they don't hit year one. Let's look at Jackson Smith and Jigba. He still has immense value, even though he only had 600 yards this past season. So if you are in a Dynasty rookie draft, you need to be familiar with these guys. You can use different resources to become familiar by watching YouTube clips or a mock draft database to determine where they will get drafted. Or if you draft after the NFL draft, then you can just scout the rookies based on where they get drafted and when they get drafted.
Absolutely. Rookies, so important. And especially if you're transitioning from redraft to Dynasty, there's just so many, 20, 30 at least, that you need to know. Hit the books, go into YouTube and check out, the values of some of these rookies. Vaz and I did a top 24 rookies for the upcoming season. Check out that video, things like that. Educate yourself on the rookie class. Let's take a look at commandment number 2.
Thou shalt not get stuck in the middle.
This happens in redraft, but it happens more often in Dynasty leagues, because usually the top teams that win year in, year out, that for that particular season, they don't own their top picks. They're trading picks in order to buff their team up to win that season. And then, they'll kind of phase out after because they age. It's usually the cycle of how it goes. And teams that, trade some of their top players for picks, those teams are rebuilding. And you're eventually going to see a very visible line between the haves and the have-nots. What you don't want to do is be that team in the middle that still has each of your picks every draft, but none of anyone else's. And you're just always barely making the playoffs or barely not. And you're just stuck in the middle. Hey, you're in this to win championships, right?
Yes, exactly. So this is very important. You have to be real with yourself. Every offseason, you have to look at your team and you have to decide, am I a top 4 team? Am I a top 3 team? Can I go for it this year? You have to be real with yourself. And if you're not, if you're starting to age out and you're not a top 3 team, it's time to hit that rebuild button. It's time to reset. Okay. Sell your players before they lose all their value. It's better to be a year too early than a year too late.
Classic line that we hear all the time, but so true. When you get ready and you've built up your team, then be ready to strike. And at that moment, right, when your players are maturing, that's the time to really aggressively go after a championship. But don't get stuck in the middle where you're just constantly, finishing somewhere between 5th and 8th. It's pretty much just pointless. The most important rule, the first commandment of Dynasty leagues.
Thou shalt not try to win in year 1 of a Dynasty startup.
Vaz, we did an entire video about this, so we obviously feel very strongly about it. If you haven't seen it, go and watch that. It really explains everything about what it is all about. But, I mean, this is just so obvious, right, Vaz?
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, this is what I live by. The number one time to acquire value is in your startup, okay? And the best way to do that is to use the productive struggle approach. We spent an entire video talking about it. That's how important it is. Go watch that video if you haven't already.
Yeah, I mean, starting off the league or the startup, it's so important. As I mentioned before, if you get off to a bad start, the incorrect start, I should say, you can really, be struggling for 2, 3, 4 seasons. Sometimes it can take to get you back on your feet if you draft too old and are unable to win in the first year or two. So when you use the productive struggle approach that we talked about, I call it the process, but you're setting yourself up to win in year 3 and acquire draft picks to be young. And then from year 3 to maybe year 8, 10, who knows how long, you are going to be set up to dominate for such a long period of time. And if you watch our tutorial on how to do that, it's going to make a lot of sense. So do go and check that video out.
And let me add one thing. It is a hell of a lot of fun as well.
Yeah, it actually is. And especially the first couple of years, you're not stressed because you're not thinking about winning. You're just thinking about taking advantage of everyone else that's trying to win. All right. Well, these are our 10 commandments of Dynasty leagues. Do you agree with all of these, or are there any rules that you think that we've missed out on? If you feel so inclined, please do leave a comment in the comment section below. Let's discuss about these. Vaz and I both love talking about it, but we also love responding to your opinions on these issues as well. So please do post your thoughts about this as well. One other note, hey, we what are we at, Vaz? Like 24, 25 subscribers? We're just starting out. So subscribe to the channel and imagine being able to say in 2-3 years, yeah, I remember Jason and Vaz. They started off that podcast like a couple of years ago. I was watching them when they only had like 24, 25 subscribers. I think I was subscriber number 26. That's how long ago I've been following these guys. Imagine being able to say that when we're the authority in fantasy football. That is going
I
to be
love the
awesome.
confidence.
Yeah.
I love
so
the
please,
confidence, buddy.
like I said, subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave your comments below, and be a part of the Fantasy Football Freaks.